Welcome to The Explainer. So, have you ever wondered what happens when you put the absolute smartest, most capable people in a single room together to solve a problem? I mean, logic dictates you'd get a brilliant solution, right? Well, psychology tells us a completely different story. Today, we're going to explore this invisible, almost insidious psychological trap that causes highly intelligent, incredibly tight-knit teams to make catastrophically bad decisions. We're going to unpack the theory behind this, look at a massive historical failure, and, most importantly, give you the tools to ensure this never ever happens in your own boardroom. Okay, let's dive right into this central mystery. How is it actually possible that a room full of undisputed experts can come up with a spectacularly terrible plan? It's this wild paradox that's fascinated social psychologists for decades now. You'd completely expect a group of highly educated specialists to naturally challenge each other, find the hidden flaws in a strategy, and optimize the final outcome. But time and time again, whether we're talking government, corporate business, or even scientific research, we see these brilliant teams marching straight off a cliff and seemingly in perfect unison. All right, let's get into section 1, the Bay of Pigs fiasco. We are going to look at the anatomy of an actual disaster. To really see this in action, we have to look at a high-stakes historical case study. So, picture this. Late 1950s, the Eisenhower administration plans this invasion, allocating $13.1 million, which was a huge amount of money back then, to the CIA to overthrow Fidel Castro. Fast forward, John F. Kennedy is elected in 1960, and he inherits this massive operation. His team, famously known as the best and the brightest, reviews the strategy. You would absolutely think these geniuses would spot the glaring flaws from a mile away, right? But instead of tearing the plan apart and stress testing it, they were feeling incredibly confident fresh off their election victory, and they just pushed it right through. By April 1961, the invasion failed spectacularly. It was an absolute disaster that severely damaged U.S. credibility, and ironically, it ended up strengthening Cuba's ties with the Soviet Union. Now, I want you to pay close attention to a very specific phrase here: uncritically accepted. Social psychologist Irving Yannis pointed out that the Kennedy administration actively ignored dissenting voices. Highly respected advisors like Arthur Schlesinger and Senator J. William Fulbright actually attempted to raise serious objections, but the core group, they basically marginalized them just to maintain harmony. They were totally caught up in this illusion of overconfidence and a firm belief in the inherent morality of their plan, which effectively shut down any real, meaningful debate. Which brings us to section 2, enter groupthink, the actual psychological trap causing all of this. So, social psychologist Irving Yannis formally coined this term in 1972. He was fascinated by how intelligent, experienced groups like Kennedy's cabinet could make such unbelievably bad decisions. He realized, hey, this isn't an issue of intelligence at all. It's entirely an issue of psychology and group dynamics. He called it groupthink. It's basically a mode of thinking that takes over when the desire for harmony, unanimity, and conformity within a tight group completely overrides the realistic appraisal of alternative options. Yannis noted that it literally leads to a deterioration of mental efficiency, reality testing, and moral judgment. Simply put, the group values getting along way more than they value getting it right. And this creates a genuinely dystopian reality where individual critical thought is just sort of plugged into and overwritten by the collective mind. When concurrence seeking, just trying to get everyone to agree, becomes the dominant force in the room, individuals basically stop being individuals. They self-censor, they completely ignore their own gut doubts, and they morph into this hive mind that is entirely detached from objective reality. Moving right along to section 3, leadership and group cohesion. This is where we get the perfect storm. You see, groupthink doesn't just spontaneously happen every time people gather around a conference table. It requires a very specific set of conditions, and the research points to a super dangerous equation: high group cohesion plus dominant leadership. Now, team cohesion usually feels amazing, right? It means mutual trust, shared goals, you feel like you belong. But highly cohesive groups often develop a culture where rocking the boat feels like a complete betrayal of the team. When you combine that tight-knit, almost familial loyalty with a dominant leader who controls the process, imposes their own opinions early on, and limits open discussion, well, it severely restricts the diversity of perspectives. The leader sets the tone, and the cohesive group just obediently falls right in line to protect their shared identity. To help us actually spot this happening in the real world, Yannis identified 8 testable symptoms of groupthink. And we can break these down super efficiently into 3 main categories, or types, of behavioral warning signs. Type 1 involves overestimations of the group's power and morality. Type 2 involves closed-mindedness. And type 3 focuses entirely on internal pressures toward uniformity. Let's break these down real quick to see exactly what they look like in practice. Looking at those first two categories, teams basically develop an unrealistic sense of invulnerability. They suffer from this excessive optimism that actually encourages extreme and sometimes, frankly, reckless risk-taking. They also develop an unquestioned belief in the inherent morality of their group. It's that dangerous mindset of, hey, we're the good guys, so whatever we decide must be the right thing to do. Because of this, they rationalize away any red flags that challenge their assumptions, and they start stereotyping outsiders, competitors, or anyone who criticizes them as weak, evil, or just plain stupid. And then we have the type 3 symptoms, which are all about the pressures toward uniformity. Be honest, have you ever just nodded along in a meeting just to keep the peace? We all have. That is self-censorship at work, and it creates this wild illusion of unanimity, where the group falsely assumes that because everyone is quiet, everyone totally agrees. If someone actually does speak up, they face direct pressure and are often accused of being disloyal to the team. And maybe the craziest part? Groups actually develop self-appointed mind guards, literally team members who take it upon themselves to actively shield the leader and the group from any dissenting information that might ruin their comfortable little bubble. All right, on to section 4, escaping the groupthink trap. Let's talk about the antidote. Now that we know the anatomy of this disaster and the psychological traps that cause it, the good news is we aren't powerless here. First things first, we absolutely must contrast the dangerous role of the mind guard with the heroism of the devil's advocate. While the mind guard acts as a filter to protect the group's harmony and literally hide problematic facts, the devil's advocate is a role specifically designed to fracture that illusion of unanimity. By formally assigning someone to play the devil's advocate, you're actually giving them a psychological safety. They aren't just being a difficult jerk, they are quite literally just doing their assigned job of evaluating risks and challenging assumptions. Leaders can implement some really precise, structured steps to ensure getting it right is always prioritized over just getting it done quickly. Step 1. Formally assign that critical evaluator role to every member, giving them explicit permission to voice their doubts. Step 2, and honestly, this is absolutely crucial. Leaders must withhold their own initial preferences and expectations right at the outset. Because think about it, if the boss says what they want first, the cohesive group is just going to echo it right back. And step 3, regularly invite outside experts into the room and explicitly encourage them to poke holes in the core team's views. When you adopt these strategies, teams can practice what is called vigilant appraisal. And remember that Bay of Pigs disaster we talked about earlier? Well, President Kennedy definitely learned a harsh lesson from that failure, because just a year later, during the terrifyingly high-stakes Cuban Missile Crisis, he actively applied these exact preventative measures. He invited outside experts, he intentionally absented himself from certain meetings so his team could debate freely without him hovering, and he encouraged rigorous pushback. Through vigilant appraisal, they totally avoided groupthink and successfully navigated one of the most dangerous crises in modern history. Which leaves us with a final, slightly provocative thought for you to take away from today's explainer. Look, groupthink thrives in the dark. It's completely fueled by our natural human desire to just fit in and get along with everyone. But true world-changing collaboration, that requires friction. It requires real debate, and it requires the courage to disagree. So when you sit down at your very next team meeting, which role are you going to choose to play? Will you quietly nod along as the mind guard, protecting a fragile harmony? Or will you actually have the courage to be the devil's advocate and help your team find the truth? Think about that, and we'll catch you next time.